Alan had always been focused on his studies and career, not interested in starting a family anytime soon. The idea of settling down was far from his mind. But everything changed when he received an unexpected proposal, an opportunity to marry the daughter of a wealthy businessman. Her father, a well-established millionaire, offered Alan a life of luxury and comfort, a life that seemed like a dream come true for someone in his position. At first, Alan hesitated. His entire life was centered around building a career, and marriage seemed like an unnecessary distraction. But the offer was too tempting to ignore. There were financial incentives, and the connections he would gain by marrying into such a prominent family were undeniable. However, there was one factor that Alan couldn't overlook: the appearance of the young woman he was being asked to marry. Her name was Milline, and she was the daughter of the millionaire. Alan had heard a lot about her, but he had never met her in person. The rumors about her appearance had circulated, and they didn't paint the most flattering picture. Milline was said to have a unique mark on her face, a birthmark that stood out, making her different from other women. In a world where physical appearance often influenced social standing and opportunities, Alan couldn't help but wonder how this mark would affect his future. Would he be able to live a fulfilling life with someone who was, according to others, less conventionally attractive? Despite his doubts, Alan made the decision to meet Milline, to understand for himself who she really was. The first meeting was not what he expected. She was intelligent, kind, and confident, with a personality that shone brighter than any superficial feature could diminish. It wasn't her appearance that caught his attention. It was the strength in her character and the warmth in her eyes. Yet, the question still lingered in his mind. Could he live a life with someone who didn't fit society's standards of beauty? Alan's thoughts were interrupted by the excitement of the family as the day of Milline's birth came into the picture. It was a significant day for her father, who had hoped for a son to inherit his empire. But when the midwife came rushing out of the room with the announcement, "It's a girl," the father's hopes were dashed, even though he tried to mask his disappointment. A fleeting thought crossed his mind. Perhaps he could still find a way to secure his wealth by arranging for Milline to marry a man of good lineage when she grew older. Milline's father, even in his fleeting moment of disappointment, couldn't foresee how his perception of his daughter would change. Upon seeing her face for the first time, he noticed the mark that would become part of Milline's identity. It didn't make her less of a person, but he briefly wondered who would want to marry a girl with such a visible difference. It was then that the father realized just how superficial his thoughts had been. This mark didn't define Milline. Her value came from within, from the love and care she had been surrounded by, and from the strength that her family couldn't yet appreciate. As the years went by, Milline grew up, and the mark on her face remained a constant part of her identity. Her parents, though they loved her deeply, couldn't escape the traditional mindset that valued a woman's beauty above all else. They thought of Milline's future marriage and were concerned about her being overlooked by suitors. But Milline was more than her appearance. She was smart, capable, and full of ambition. Milline's family dynamics were filled with love, but also a sense of discomfort, as her siblings would sometimes tease her about her appearance. The playful jabs, though meant in jest, were hurtful. Her brothers and sisters didn't realize the impact their teasing had on her, and over time it began to erode Milline's self-esteem. Though she was deeply loved by her family, their acceptance didn't shield her from the insecurities she felt, especially when it came to her appearance. Even as Milline grew older, the mark on her face became a symbol of the difference she felt in the world. Her siblings' teasing, though affectionate, chipped away at her confidence, making her wonder if she was truly loved for who she was, or if her appearance was the only thing that mattered to others. Milline began to internalize the idea that her mark was a flaw, a thing that would prevent her from being accepted by others and, in particular, by the one thing she longed for, a loving husband. As she watched her peers dream of perfect marriages and picture perfect lives, Mellyn consciously kept herself distanced from those dreams. She didn't believe she deserved them. She didn't expect someone to love her for who she truly was. Despite this, Mellyn didn't give up on her dreams. She secretly attended an event held by a well-known university in town. The event, designed to attract new students to the university's programs, was exactly what Mellyn had been hoping for. It opened her eyes to the possibilities that lay beyond the family home, beyond the expectations of marriage and family life that her parents held so dear. At the event, Mellyn could see herself in the university's halls, learning and growing, carving out a future for herself. But there was one big obstacle: her parents. Mellyn knew that her parents, especially her father, would never approve of her living in another city alone to study. Their traditional values, centered around marriage and family, didn't leave much room for the independence Mellyn yearned for. But she couldn't ignore the dream that had now taken root. She wanted to explore, to learn, and to live life on her terms, far from the expectations of her family. As Mellyn walked through the halls of the university, she realized that she had to find a way to make her dream a reality. She didn't know how, but she was determined to try. As the years went by, Mellyn's mark remained an inseparable part of her life. It wasn't just a physical feature. It became a symbol of the way she saw herself, the way the world sometimes saw her. Although her parents loved her unconditionally, they couldn't escape the societal pressures that often tied beauty to value. As Mellyn grew older, it became clear that her appearance, marked by the prominent birthmark on her face, was something that not only defined her outwardly, but also shaped how others perceived her. Her family, though they truly cared for her, still didn't seem to fully understand the weight of the teasing she endured. At first, her siblings' comments were lighthearted and playful. They didn't mean to be cruel. They were simply teasing her, as siblings often do. But over time, their words became more biting, less innocent. They would call her names like ugly or make cruel jokes about her appearance. Even if it was done in jest, it cut deep. The once loving words turned into barbs that slowly began to erode her self-confidence. Mellyn would smile along with them, laugh at their jokes, but inside, a storm of insecurity brewed. What was once just teasing had started to chip away at her self-esteem, making her feel isolated, even within her own family. She didn't want to be the ugly one, the one who didn't fit the mold. She often wondered if anyone would ever love her, if anyone could look beyond her outward appearance and see the person she was on the inside. Despite these struggles, Mellyn was determined not to let her mark define her future. She was strong, ambitious, and full of dreams. In her heart, she longed for something more than the life that seemed to be preordained for her. Her parents, with their traditional values, viewed marriage as the ultimate goal for their daughter. They believed that Mellyn's worth would be determined by the man she married, that a successful marriage would bring her happiness and fulfillment. But Mellyn didn't share this vision. She had aspirations that went beyond the narrow boundaries her parents had set for her. The world around her was changing. Women were beginning to find their voices, to demand independence and opportunities. The winds of change were blowing, but the traditions that her parents held dear still cast a heavy shadow over her. Mellyn didn't want to be confined to the life they had imagined for her. She wanted to explore the world, to carve out a path that was her own. But most of all, she wanted to feel valued for who she was, not just for the mark on her face. When Mellyn turned 18, the pressure to marry intensified. Her parents, concerned that no man would ever want her because of her appearance, pushed her to start thinking about settling down. They believed that a marriage proposal was the answer to her future, and they saw her mark as a hurdle that would make her less desirable in the eyes of potential suitors. They couldn't understand why Malign didn't share their sense of urgency or why she wasn't as interested in marriage as they were. The more her parents pushed for marriage, the more Malign resisted. She wasn't ready to settle down. She wasn't ready to be a wife and mother before she had even had the chance to live for herself. But the constant pressure left her feeling conflicted. She loved her parents, and she knew they were doing what they thought was best for her, but the traditional path they envisioned for her felt suffocating. Malign wanted something more, something that wasn't tied to the expectations of her family or society. In the midst of this turmoil, Malign found solace in her studies. School had always been a place where she could escape, where her mind could wander beyond the narrow confines of her world. She excelled in her classes, and though she still struggled with the teasing and the way people viewed her, she began to build a sense of self-worth based on her intellectual abilities. In her studies, she found her voice, and with that voice came a realization: she didn't need to fit the mold that others had created for her. She could be successful, independent, and whole, all on her own. But even as she excelled academically, Malign couldn't help but feel like something was missing. She longed for a future where she wasn't defined by her appearance, where her worth was based on her mind, her ambition, and her heart. She dreamed of going to a university in another city, far away from the small town where everyone knew her and judged her based on the mark on her face. She imagined herself walking the halls of an institution of higher learning, surrounded by people who valued her for her intellect and character, not her appearance. But the prospect of leaving her family, especially in the eyes of her parents, was daunting. Her mother, though loving and supportive, still held on to traditional values, believing that a woman's place was in the home or with a family of her own. She could not understand why Malign wanted to leave, why she wanted something beyond what was expected of her. Her father, too, although less vocal, held the same beliefs. He wanted Malign to settle down and take her place in the family structure, not to venture off on her own, chasing dreams that felt too distant, too uncertain. One day, Malign's desire for independence led her to a life-changing event. A renowned university was holding an open day in town, inviting prospective students to come and learn about the programs they offered. Malign didn't tell her parents she was going. She knew they wouldn't approve, but she couldn't resist the chance to explore her options. She went to the event, and for the first time in her life, she felt like there was a place for her outside of the expectations of her family. The university represented a future where she could define herself, not by her family or her appearance, but by what she could achieve. While walking through the university campus, listening to the presentations about the various programs and opportunities available, Malign was filled with hope. She could see herself there, among the students, studying, growing, and thriving. But as much as the idea excited her, she knew the biggest hurdle was still to come: her parents. Her parents would never approve of her living in another city. To them, a woman's place was always with her family, under their roof, until she was married. Malign felt a deep sense of frustration. She wanted to pursue her dreams, but the shackles of tradition seemed to hold her back at every turn. She returned home that evening with a heavy heart, knowing that the road ahead was going to be difficult. But she was more determined than ever to find a way to break free from the confines of her family's expectations. She wasn't sure how, but she knew that university was the key to her future, and she would do whatever it took to make it happen. The days following the university event left Malign both hopeful and frustrated. She had discovered a world of possibilities, one that promised independence, growth, and a future of her own. But the harsh reality of her parents' expectations loomed large over her aspirations. They couldn't understand why she would want to leave home, to go to another city, to study, and to live on her own. For them, the path was clear: get married, start a family, and fulfill the role that they believed a woman's life should revolve around. Melly knew that convincing her parents to let her go to university would be an uphill battle, but she wasn't ready to give up on her dream just yet. As Meline lay in bed one night, turning over the events in her mind, an idea began to form, a solution that seemed bold, unconventional, and yet strangely logical. What if she could turn the situation around and use the very thing her parents cared about most marriage as a way to get what she wanted? It wasn't that she wanted to marry. It was that marriage to them was the key to her independence. So, Meline decided to devise a plan to present to her parents, a fake marriage. She wasn't naive. She knew this wouldn't be easy to pull off. But she also knew that if she could convince her parents that she was serious about marriage, they might be willing to finance her education. At first, she thought about approaching a man who could help her with this plan. But as the pieces of her strategy began to take shape, one name kept coming to the forefront of her mind. Alan. Alan was someone she had known for years, someone from a respected family, a longtime family friend. He was intelligent, driven, and had his own ambitions. They had spent many years in each other's company, but their relationship had never been anything more than that of casual acquaintances. Still, they shared a mutual understanding of the pressures that came from family expectations, and Meline knew that Alan, like her, was no stranger to the weight of responsibility placed on them by their families. So, with a combination of hope and fear, Meline decided to approach Alan with her proposal. The next day, Meline found him at the university event they had both attended. The air was thick with unspoken tension, as both of them were carrying the burden of their respective family pressures. After exchanging pleasantries, Meline took a deep breath and shared her bold plan. She explained how marriage was the key to her parents' approval, how it was the only way they would let her leave home and go to university. "I know this might sound crazy," she said, "but if we pretend to get married, my parents will finance our education and we'll both be able to live out our dreams." Alan listened in stunned silence as Meline outlined the logistics of her proposal. Her words hung in the air between them, each one making the plan sound more and more absurd. Alan's expression flickered between surprise and disbelief. "You want us to fake a marriage?" he asked, a hint of confusion in his voice. "But we're not even that close. And my main focus right now is my studies, not starting a family." Meline, though nervous, pressed on. "I understand how strange this sounds, but this is the only way I can go to university without my parents stopping me. We wouldn't need to make this anything more than a temporary arrangement. Once we've achieved what we want, we can go our separate ways. It's just a means to an end." Alan thought for a moment. He had always admired Meline for her intelligence and ambition, but he had never seen her in the context of marriage, let alone a fake one. Yet, the more he considered her words, the more it made sense. He, too, was struggling with financial difficulties that made his future uncertain. A fake marriage could solve his problems, just as it could solve hers. Still, it was a difficult concept to accept. "Are you sure this is the only option?" Alan asked cautiously. "Yes," Meline replied with a sigh. "I'm sure." After a long silence, Alan finally nodded. "All right, let's do it. But only as a means to achieve our goals." The two agreed to move forward with the plan, though both were uncertain of how things would unfold. What they hadn't anticipated was how complex their situation would become as they played the roles of a couple in love. Neither of them had ever imagined themselves in a marriage, fake or otherwise. And as they began to prepare for the upcoming ceremony, they realized just how challenging it would be to pretend to be a couple in front of their families, especially given the deep cultural importance of marriage in their society. Meline's parents, as expected, were thrilled by the idea of her marrying Alan, particularly because he came from a respected family. They had long believed that Meline would never find a suitable match due to her appearance, and the news that a man of good lineage was interested in her filled them with a joy they hadn't felt in years. They quickly began making elaborate plans for a grand wedding ceremony, and Meline and Alan found themselves swept up in the preparations, even though neither of them felt any real excitement for the event. For Meline, it was a means to an end. For Alan, it was a temporary arrangement to help him out of his financial difficulties. The wedding day arrived, and it was everything Meline had feared. The ceremony was lavish, with relatives, friends, and acquaintances all gathered to celebrate the union of two people who didn't truly know each other as husband and wife. Meline wore a stunning gown, and Alan looked dashing in his suit, but neither of them felt any true connection as they walked down the aisle. The entire day felt like an act, a performance that they were both reluctant participants in, but the real challenge came when they exchanged vows. As they stood before the officiant, Meline's father's harsh words echoed in her mind. "I know that her mark may not make her attractive to others, but she will do her best to make you happy." These words, meant to reassure Alan, were instead a painful reminder of the way Meline had always been treated by her family and by society. She felt her heart drop as the words rang in her ears, but Alan, sensing her discomfort, stepped forward without hesitation. "With all due respect, sir," he said firmly, "your daughter is an incredibly beautiful woman. If someone cannot see past a mark on her face, I believe that person lacks the ability to recognize the true beauty she carries." In that moment, Meline's heart swelled with unexpected gratitude. Alan's defense of her was more than she had ever hoped for. It was the first time anyone had stood up for her so boldly. And for the first time, Meline felt like she truly mattered, not because of her appearance, but because of who she was as a person. As the ceremony came to a close and the two left for the new city where they would begin their new lives, Meline and Alan's relationship began to evolve. Despite the fake nature of their marriage, something genuine started to form between them. They lived in the same apartment, studied together, and navigated the challenges of university life side by side. And though their relationship was built on a facade, the bond they shared began to grow into something deeper. Both Meline and Alan kept their promise to maintain independence. They found part-time jobs to support themselves, juggling schoolwork and work responsibilities. Meline made it clear to Alan that their marriage was nothing more than a temporary arrangement, a means to an end. But Alan, over time, grew closer. To her, he found himself drawn to her strength, her intellect, and her kind heart. He admired her resilience in the face of the teasing and rejection she had endured throughout her life. The more time they spent together, the more Alan found himself respecting and even caring for Meline, not just as a friend or a partner in a marriage of convenience, but as someone he deeply admired. Graduation day arrived, and with it came a new chapter in both of their lives. Meline and Alan, now graduates with a shared future ahead of them, decided to open their own law firm, a dream they had both nurtured during their years of study. Their fake marriage, which had started as a strategic arrangement, had evolved into a genuine partnership based on trust, respect, and love. Though their journey had started as a temporary solution to their problems, it had transformed into something lasting and real. The love that had blossomed between Meline and Alan was unexpected, but it was powerful. What had begun as a strategic move, a simple means to an end, had turned into a deep, unshakable bond. Meline and Alan's story became a testament to the idea that love can grow in the most unlikely of circumstances. Sometimes, love isn't just about meeting the right person at the right time. It's about finding someone who will stand by you through thick and thin, someone who will love you for who you truly are beyond the surface. And so, Meline and Alan, the unlikely couple who had once pretended to be in love, found a deep, enduring love that was more than just a facade. Together, they built a life that was filled with trust, respect, and mutual admiration.